Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeremy Burton. I'm the Executive Director at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. As most of you are already aware, an important part of our work at JCRC is the work we do on Beacon Hill with our state legislature. We advance our community's shared priorities, securing public funding, and advocating for a broad-ranging policy agenda. From civil rights to human services, economic opportunity to safety and security, and the protection of democratic values. JCRC advocates for an inclusive agenda, highlighting the leadership work of our member agencies and the human service agencies of the Jewish community across the Commonwealth. An important part of what makes that successful are our partnerships on Beacon Hill with members of the legislature and their staff, and with members of the administration. And for those of you who've been joining us over the last 6 months, we've been having a series of conversations with our allies in public office, in particular, Jewish leaders serving in public office, to learn about how their identity informs their work, the issues they're working on, and how they see the Jewish community as a partner on Beacon Hill. Today, we've invited Representative Ruth Balzer to join us to share more about what drives her as a Jewish leader and as a leader in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. As always, there's time for questions, and please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit questions for Rep. Balzer. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Ruth Balzer, the state representative for the 12th Middlesex District, which includes roughly the southern half of the city of Newton. Now serving her 12th term in the House of Representatives, Rep. Balzer continues to be an independent, progressive voice, fighting for the values and priorities of her community. Representative Balzer serves as a member of House Speaker Mariano's leadership team as a division chair, and will include her full bio in a link in the chat. Representative Balzer, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to start with a conversation we were starting to have before we came on camera, which is to share a little bit about your own journey as a political activist and as a member and a leader in the Jewish community that led you to this role.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me for this conversation. You know how special the partnership is between me and JCRC for all the years I've served in the legislature. And my involvement in the organized Jewish community, of course, precedes even the years in the legislature, but it's good to be here. So when people ask me, how did my Jewish upbringing or my Jewish background influence my work, I describe growing up in a Jewish American family in New York, in Queens, in the shadow of the Holocaust. In case it's not obvious, I'm a baby boomer. But, I was born only a few short years after the close of World War II. And conversation about the Holocaust was very present in my earliest childhood. And the way I remember my parents of blessed memory talking about it was they talked about the Nazis and the horrible crimes that they committed. But the message I remember them talking about was they said the really guilty ones were what people in the 50s used to talk about, the good Germans, in quotes, the people who sat by in silence and allowed it to happen. And there was a very clear message from my parents that it was the next generation's responsibility to never stand by in silence, to always speak out against injustice. And my sister, my brother, and I, we got that message, as did many, I think, in my generation. And by the time I was, 12 or 13, I was marching for civil rights. I spent much of my college years when I wasn't studying psychology, marching for peace in Southeast Asia. By the early 70s, as a young adult woman, I became involved with what we then called the Women's Liberation Movement. And all of that was really about what my parents taught me, which is that, it's our moral responsibility to speak out against injustice and for equality. And that has certainly shaped my work in the legislature, where working for equal rights for all people has been a top priority. Earlier in my legislative career, working on marriage equality, then transgender rights, and most recently partnering with you on the rights of immigrants. I very much attribute my sensitivity to social and economic justice issues to having been brought up in a Jewish family.
Thank you, Rep. Balzer, and it's great to be reminded of like the numerous examples you just gave of places where you've worked very closely with JCRC and the organized Jewish community throughout your tenure in the legislature, as you said, marriage equality, transgender rights. But because it's present and because it is an issue that's, like, I guess, in play right now, and we just had a major public hearing last week on it, let's talk about immigrant rights. And you have been the lead sponsor on the Safe Communities Act for a number of years now, along with some of your colleagues, and you've really championed this effort around immigrants. We just had a public hearing about it this week. JCRC and many of our member agencies have been there as part of the coalition on this. Why don't we talk a little bit about that, your particular work on immigration, and that particular bill?
Sure. Well, so the Safe Communities Act, for those who don't know, is a really important piece of legislation that basically, the way I like to describe it is it draws a line between what is a federal responsibility from what is a state and local responsibility in terms of law enforcement. Immigration enforcement is a federal responsibility. It is not the responsibility of states or municipalities. But nonetheless, many states and municipalities, including in our state, assist the work of ICE. And what this bill, would do is prohibit local law enforcement from participating in immigration enforcement. And the reason for that is, we want people in the immigrant community to feel safe and welcomed here in Massachusetts. And this, does connect very closely to what we were just talking about in terms of my Jewish identity, or how I experience the messages that came to me from the Jewish community. Because what I even said when I testified last week on the bill was, while I don't have the personal memory, I have the historical memory of the United States enacting strict immigration limits in the 1920s and 1930s. And when the Jews of Europe needed refuge, the doors here were closed. And so I feel very sensitive to the issue of making sure that immigrants and refugees feel welcomed here in Massachusetts. And we can do that by saying that if you call the local police because you need help with something, they're not going to say, oh, and by the way, show me your immigration papers. According to our bill, they would be prohibited from doing that. And that's really important because I know JCRC was at the hearing, and we heard women who are survivors of domestic abuse, for instance, talking about how they were scared to call the police for help because either they or a loved one doesn't have immigration papers. And the abuser would threaten them. We're going to call ICE. We'll get you deported, or we'll get your mother deported. And what was very moving in the hearing was some partners that I've worked with, some police chiefs, testified as well and said, we support this because we want the community to trust us and to feel safe coming to us. And we're not interested. We have enough on our plate. We're not interested in doing immigration enforcement. So JCRC has been a very important voice, partnering in support of that bill.
I thank you for that. I want to dive more into that, but I appreciate your naming JCRC and thanking us. For us, in a similar way to the way you expressed it, it's very much in the DNA of us as a Jewish community. And I think, to the extent people are familiar with JCRC's work right now, people are aware of the fact that we are coordinating this amazing network of congregations and individuals who are, we're accompanying asylum seekers during the last 4 years, are now helping to open up and welcome spaces for Afghan refugees who arrive in the Commonwealth. And that's been the present work, but for us as well, like you said, it's in our DNA. And while JCRC was initially founded in the early 1940s as a way for the Jewish community to deal with specifically with anti-Semitism, really one of the very first public policy agendas we took on within our first 5 or 10 years was federal immigration policy, because suddenly we were in the world, even though we were founded in 1944, suddenly we were in the world right after the Holocaust of dealing with the refugees from Europe and needing to reform our immigration laws. And so that element of a welcoming nation is very deep in the internal sort of DNA of American Jews. And I appreciate that it comes from that place for you. I also, and let's not to make everything like a softball, as you said, and as I just said, immigration has been a long-standing issue, and the Safe Communities Act is not exactly a new bill. I think it's been about 5 or 6 years since you initially filed it. So I wanted to sort of open up the sort of like what's going on right now, what's different, what was different in last week's hearing, say from the hearing, which was one of the last times I saw you before the pandemic, was at a hearing for Safe Communities last year. Maybe what's different in terms of the opportunity to adopt the Safe Communities Act because of the pandemic?
Well, it's a good question. I think the pandemic has certainly highlighted some of these issues. One of the things that is different, once we got into COVID, the medical community stepped up in support of this legislation. We'd not heard from them in particular before, but there was alarm in the medical community about how many people in the immigrant community were hesitant to come forward for medical treatment or participate in contact tracing, and then later for vaccination, because of this worry that authorities talk to each other. And if they went to a doctor, would the doctor call the police? And so the Mass Medical Society and a long list of public health and medical organizations, the community health centers, have stepped up and said, we've really got to do this. We've got to make sure it's not only a moral responsibility, it's in all of our interests in terms of public health. If whole communities of people are afraid to get vaccinated or to participate in contact tracing. That's different. But there's another element about COVID that I like to talk about as well, which is that it was many of the people in the immigrant community who were our frontline workers. And so when folks like you or me could work from, the safety of our remote virtual, it was many immigrants who were out there taking the risk and keeping things going for all of us. And I really feel we owe it to them. They kept us safe. I feel we owe it to them to keep them safe. And that's another reason now that I'm hoping some of my colleagues will be persuaded to jump on board and support this.
Wow. Really appreciate your leadership on this. So last question on the Safe Communities Act. What's your prediction? Will we have a Safe Communities law in 2022?
Oh, gee, I never make predictions. I really don't. What I can say is I'm hoping really and working hard, as are many of my colleagues and many folks on the outside, to make it happen. Governor Baker has made it more difficult for us because he, at least last session, threatened to veto it. And so that means we have to get 2/3 vote, not just a majority. We would easily have a majority today. So anything you can say to Governor Baker to persuade him, that would help us. That would help us a lot. Maybe in this last year in office, he would consider, doing what I think is the morally right thing to do. But I guess the other thing going for us is what changed in Washington. Our new president on day one said that he wanted to build a pathway to citizenship to the 11 million who live in the shadows in our country. And it's not looking like he's going to accomplish everything he hoped, but I think having that message out there from, the federal government is helpful. So I'm hoping that all these things, and we have the support of law enforcement. I want to give a shout out to my good friend, the Middlesex District Attorney, Marian Ryan, who's was out there, and she helped change the conversation by making it clear that law enforcement's on our side. So no predictions, but a lot of hope and a lot of hard work to persuade enough people to do it.
Wow. As a nonpartisan organization, I will only say that I am confident that the governor is aware that we will have his back if he agrees to sign this legislation. And I appreciate the unwillingness to make predictions in this environment. Switching gears, and I just want to remind the audience again that you can use the Q&A function if there are questions that you want to raise or issues that you want us to talk about. You talked about growing up around parents talking about the Holocaust. I think this is a way in which you and I have similar backgrounds, in the sense of I also grew up in New York, although I was in Manhattan, and similarly grew up in a community of Jews with like lots of survivors. There were classmates whose parents were survivors. Both of my step-parents, both of my parents in their second marriage married survivors. So certainly growing up with a deep awareness of the Holocaust. And I want to bring that back to sort of your Jewish leadership. And I don't think people are always aware of it. And I just want to appreciate that you have been really a leader in the State House on elevating Jewish issues, in particular Holocaust recognition. And I know that every year around the end of January, you have been organizing a resolution of the House, recognizing International Holocaust Remembrance Associate Day. You've also led the effort for the House of Representatives to adopt a resolution recognizing the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism as a working definition for education and engagement. I would love to invite you, because this is JCRC and these are Jewish leaders here, and you are a Jewish leader in a building that we all watch, not just to say we appreciate and name the leadership you've brought on that specific set of concerns in the House, but to invite your reflection on what it's like being a Jewish member in the House, what it's like. Are there challenges? Are there issues? Are there conversations that come up between you and your colleagues as a member of the Jewish community?
So, okay, so it's an interesting question. When I got to the State House, which is now 23 years ago, I felt awareness of my being a minority in a way that was different from other phases of my life. Growing up in New York, you certainly don't feel, like a minority as a Jewish American. And then living in Newton for my adult life and hanging out in the Newton Brookline area, certainly don't feel like that. But I arrived in the State House where Jewish Americans are definitely in the minority. And so, that was something interesting to people kind of, asking questions. I remember Speaker Finneran, who was the speaker when I first came in, asked me, how I would feel on a budget session if it was Friday and ran into Friday. I mean, it was being sensitive, but it came from a certain kind of lack of familiarity. Now, over the years, I think that's changed, and not the numbers that have changed, but sort of the experience. I think there's there's really a good appreciation of our diversity. I think in the legislature, I have a good positive feeling as more members of the Black and Latino community have been elected, as more Asian Americans have been elected. That was different when I first came. So there's more in general, I think, just an appreciation. We recently completed a redistricting whose goal is, this isn't about Jewish representation, but about minority, whose goal is to make it more welcoming, increase our opportunity to bring in more minority members. So I think there's a very sort of good feeling about all of that. I think there's a lot of respect when I have introduced those resolutions that you mentioned. There's been no objection at all, quite the contrary. A lot of enthusiastic support on the issue of the definition. I think just trusting us, trusting me, trusting JCRC, trusting that that's the right way to go. I think, I think it's really been very positive. I know one thing that comes to mind when there was that incident at Duxbury High School this past year, and that happened a little, if I'm remembering right before Pesach, and the Speaker Mariano, issued a very warm statement about the importance of challenging and learning, and of course that has all been followed up by the genocide education bill. So I think it's a good atmosphere.
Yeah, and it's not lost on me, and appreciation to you and many of your colleagues who did a lot of work on the genocide education, now law. It wasn't lost on me that the speaker really spoke to this, especially after Duxbury, and again in the last couple of weeks as it reached the conclusion of its process, from the place of being a former teacher. That yes. His experience as a teacher really informed sort of like his visceral reaction to the idea that kids were being raised in Massachusetts without an understanding of genocide. And for me, that also reminds me of, you touched on at the top of this discussion, your prior career before coming to the State House. And I know that mental health issues is something that you have made a priority during your time in the legislature. And I'm assuming that's informed by your experience prior to being elected. So I don't know if that's, there's a lot of attention right now to what's going on with Mass and Cass in Boston. I know that's not in your district. I know that it's certainly elevated attention to the issue of addiction and mental health here in Massachusetts. And I'm wondering if you could speak to those issues that are going on in Mass and Cass and how your prior professional sort of like work informs your leadership right now.
Sure, thanks. So I'm a clinical psychologist by profession, and I like to sort of brag about the fact that I'm the first psychologist to ever serve in the Massachusetts legislature. In fact, when I first ran for office, the psychologists in Massachusetts were some of my most enthusiastic supporters. And when I got to the State House, I did make mental health public policy a top priority of mine because, just drawing on my experience and my commitment, to make sure we do everything we can to improve access to mental health services and addiction services. And I've worked on those issues really through all the years I've been in the legislature. What's happened is, as I've worked more and more on those issues, it has led me into being involved with criminal justice reform, because sadly, so many people who suffer from the challenge of mental health or addiction or both land in our criminal justice system. And so I've become very involved with advocating for improving services so that people don't land in the criminal justice system, that they land in the healthcare system where they can, get their needs met. And that segues directly to Mass and Cass. And it is true, although I don't live in Boston, I have been involved and have spoken out on the issue. I attended a press conference in the middle of a nor'easter, pouring rain. You didn't see me because I had my hood and my mask in the pictures, but I got to see Mass and Cass. But the reason I was there was because one of the proposals as a way to respond to the crisis there came from the sheriff of Suffolk County to put folks in a facility in his prison. And I've been leading the charge for several years to take the programs for people with addiction out of the prisons. We have something in Massachusetts, a law called Section 35, which allows the courts to send someone whose addiction is so serious that they're at risk of harming themselves or others. It allows them to be civilly committed by a court to involuntary treatment. Massachusetts is the only state in the nation whose statutes say that if the public health beds are filled, you can send these folks to prisons. And I have legislation that would prohibit that, would prohibit sending. It's actually, my bill is about prohibiting men, because a few years ago, we decided to prohibit sending women to MCI Framingham. So I got involved with Mass and Cass because I have legislation that would actually prohibit doing what the sheriff is proposing. So he and I had a sort of friendly sparring match on one of these virtual public hearings. I don't question his intentions at all, but I have a simple message to anyone who will ever listen, which is that addiction is not a crime. It's an illness. And we should be doing more to make sure that there's treatment and housing. In the case of Mass and Cass, that's a homelessness crisis. It's a crisis of poverty, but it's also a crisis about mental health and addiction. And those folks, it sounds to me like Boston's new mayor is going to tackle it in a way that sounds to me consistent to the approach that I'm describing.
Thank you. Let me ask you about that, because some of the questions are starting to pop up, and I'm noticing in several of the questions, first of all, there's a lot of appreciation for you, for your leadership on many issues that folks here care about, including this one, and also sort of a curiosity or desire to sort of learn about the obstacles to getting things done. These are issues you've worked on for a long time. So when you talk about this decriminalization of addiction and mental illness, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to accomplishing this goal in Massachusetts?
Let's see. Well, I'm laughing to myself because it's hard to get things done. It turns out it's hard to get bills passed, the obstacles, I guess, you just have to keep building support and building and educating people about it, and getting high on the radar screen. Every session, about 8,000 bills get filed, literally. And that's a lot to pay attention to. And, there's always something big to grab the attention, like a global pandemic. That kind of distracted people from some other issues. But it's, I've had lots of successes. I think, I worked, took me 10 years to get a bill passed that for gender equity, to make sure that women didn't have to pay more for insurance than men, but, I hung in, and after 10 years, we got it done. More recently, the House passed my Public Lands Preservation Act, which I've been working on for 20 years. So, you just have to keep working on it. You have to educate, you have to build alliances. Public has to call out for it, and then you can get it done.
Yeah, I have many questions, and I suspect some of them may be questions that are more for like a quieter conversation than a publicly recorded conversation about how to move an agenda and how to raise the priority of things in the State House. But there were something you just touched on was the gender equity in insurance bill. And I'm reminded, this goes in two directions, so I want to cover them both separately. I'm reminded of, I think we were at an APAC dinner down in the Seaport, where you sort of cornered me along with one of your colleagues to twist our arms, so to speak, and ask for our support on that legislation, which, by the way, JCRC did end up supporting that effort by you. And I'll take this in two directions. We'll come back to the APAC as the setting for that in a few minutes. But first, I want to start with your leadership on gender issues. And I'll say Kate has a comment here, which is thanking you for your leadership on many issues, but asking if you could talk about how it has changed. You just talked about how it's changed being a Jewish member. How it's changed being a woman in the legislature over the course of your tenure, and how do you experience specifically that space from the perspective of being a woman in leadership?
So, okay, so we're going to the women. All right.
Let's talk about women. Let's talk about women in legislature, and then I'm going to ask. Then we're going to talk about APAC first.
Okay,
we're not going to talk about APAC, but we are going to talk about Israel.
All right. No, it wasn't. It was also that we were going to move away from the fact that I needed to twist your arm.
Oh, we can talk about that too.
Right. So the percentage of women in the legislature has been kind of stable the whole time I've been there. It's been around 25%. And we always get excited every session when maybe like one or two more come in, but it's really been about the same. I should mention that at least years ago, I don't know if they've recently redone this Sonnet study, but the Mass Women's Political Caucus did run sort of an analysis of the races, and they found, at least for Massachusetts legislative races, women did not lose more often than men. Which is to say, it wasn't a matter of discrimination or sexism on the part of the voting public. It was actually that fewer women were running. And so, something that I always feel, and I know many of my female colleagues, Kay Kahn and Cindy Cream, my buddies in the legislature, we all feel like we always try to encourage women, new, younger women students to feel that if they want to, this is something they can do. And so what has happened is I think more women are in leadership now than they were when I first came. And I think I always feel funny when people say, what's it like to be a woman in politics? I never know how to answer since I don't know what it would like to not be a woman in politics. But, I feel like there isn't a challenge in terms of credibility or respect. The speaker has the two most powerful, whatever you call them, lieutenants, are both women, and over on the Senate, women, Jewish women actually over on the Senate side. So, I think we're in a good place. I just encourage more women to run.
Got it. Yes, the Senate is particularly a prominent number of Jewish women in the leadership over there, but we are grateful to have you in the House leadership. You are welcome to, you want to talk about twisting my arm about this bill?
No. I couldn't resist that you framed it that way.
Well, it was an interesting conversation. For me, it's illuminating because you're talking about how issues rise to the center or the priorities of the legislature, and it's like, for us as well, there's an element of it wasn't so much twisting my arm. And I think, the answer was really let's get you on the agenda with our council and let's have you come and present, because it's not really my decision what our priorities are in the legislature. It is a network of 40 organizations. And in a very similar way, there are some issues that are sort of have been part of our DNA for 70 years, like immigration issues, where it doesn't require a lot of, shall we say, twisting of arms to remind ourselves of how central they are, and candidly other issues. And it just happened to be that was an example that you cared about. It required an element of making the case to a broad network of agencies to make this a Jewish priority, which they decided to do.
Yes, they did. And it was great. And it's part of the answer to the question that we don't have to take offline. When you said maybe we'll talk about how do you get things done in the legislature, maybe it's for the public to know. I mean, you just try to build support. And so to me, the issue about not charging women more for insurance, that's a civil rights issue. And so to me, I always want the Jewish community to be involved in any civil rights issue, because it feels like that's how I got into civil rights, was because of my experience growing up as a Jewish American. And but I always want everyone in all the faith communities to be partners on civil rights. And also, I just want as many people as possible. Like when you say, how do you get a bill done? It's when you just build more and more support and coalitions. And so to the people watching this, if you want to know how to decriminalize addiction or pass the Safe Communities Act, please send your emails to your reps and senators and your governor.
Thanks. I did mention the fact that we had that conversation by coincidence at an AIPAC dinner. This is not a conversation about AIPAC, it's a conversation actually about Israel. And I know that you have been passionate in your personal connection with Israel, in your personal commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship. And you know that we at JCRC, during my time here, have had the opportunity to take many, many of your colleagues to Israel. And please, hopefully, very, very soon, we can get back to normal travel, or at least some version of that, and start taking people there again. I understand that there's a story here that predates me about your involvement in persuading our Jewish community to prioritize this work and taking colleagues to Israel. And I'm curious, and I want to say for the audience, I have not heard this story. So I'm curious to hear this story.
Well, the first trip I took to Israel was with JCRC in 1999. I got to the legislature, and I had never been to Israel yet, even though everyone else in my family actually had been to Israel, but I hadn't, even though I felt always very strongly and connected to Israel. I was born the same year as the state of Israel and grew up the year of my bat mitzvah. I remember they made a big, all the celebrations are at the same time. So I got to the legislature, and I heard that there was this great trip that went to Israel that took legislators and other community leaders to Israel. But then I heard, so I got all excited, oh, maybe I could go on that trip. And then I found out the next part was that it actually was for community leaders in the larger community, meaning not Jewish. The purpose of those trips was really to educate the broader community about Israel. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I want to go. And so I was at, you remember an AIPAC meeting. I remember this happened at one of the JCRC legislative receptions that used to happen across the street, the Mass Bar Association. Anyway, I went up to your predecessor, Nancy Kaufman, and said, Nancy, are you telling me I can't go on this trip because I'm Jewish? And I said it like that. I mean, it was both. I meant it, but I also was warm and I figured if there was something I didn't understand about this. Well, anyway, a short time later, I got invited to the trip, as did Kay Kahn, who's Jewish. And I didn't think, I just thought, oh, so this really wasn't a big deal. It really wasn't. And maybe this is some of what you mentioned, someone had told you a story. I mean, years later, I learned from Nancy. Well, just like what you just said about the gender equity, she went to the board and raised it. She said, the question is being raised, whether this is a trip not only to educate the larger community, but to welcome Jewish community leaders as well. So I don't know what went on inside that meeting. You might have to ask someone else, but I was very grateful for that trip. And by the way, in terms you asked earlier about the relationship, I think it was important. It was important for me to be on that trip with my colleagues who aren't Jewish, but it was important for them that I was on the trip. I mean, I just have memories of walking through Yad Vashem arm in arm with some of my non-Jewish colleagues who, really wanted to share that,
Yeah.
So I think it's great that we now have integrated delegations.
Integrated delegations, including Jews. Okay. I had not heard that story, and the trips had stopped happening before I arrived here, and then we restarted the trips about 9 years ago now. And in my tenure here, every one of the trips has had one or two of the Jewish public officials, legislate. I think every trip, or virtually every trip, has had one or two within the delegation. And you're absolutely right that, and I've experienced it firsthand, that there is something powerful for people who are experiencing Israel for the first time to also to experience it through their lens, but also to experience it through the lens of Jewish friends, colleagues, trusted partners, to understand how we see it and experience and relate to that place as Jews. And I think it's actually become an important part of the experience to have one or two of the Jewish members on the trips when I'm on them. I am curious though, because like, as you said, there's an element of, and I'm struck by your emotion and the power of describing what it's like to go through Yad Vashem with non-Jewish friends. I've had that experience as well. Are there conversations are there conversations you end up having over the years with colleagues about Israel? And I say this, I think people here are curious. You are a progressive. I read your bio at the top. You self-describe proudly as a progressive. It's not lost on our community that there is growing hostility in some quarters of the progressive world to Israel. It's frankly not lost on our community that there are a small number of your colleagues in the House who have been openly hostile in recent years. And I'm curious, to what extent does the kind of conversation you describe having on the trip continue to inform your relationship with colleagues as leaders and partners?
Right. Well, first I would it's worth it to back up and just state that my experience is that the overwhelming numbers in the legislature is very supportive of Israel.
I said a very tiny number of them, but they
That's
are there.
Right. It was worth repeating. You made a good point. It was worth repeating. I'm aware that there are a couple, maybe a few, who are, and I'm only aware by some tweets I've seen. I've not, frankly, engaged in a conversation with, thinking of two of my colleagues in particular who I'm aware made some statements. Because it's not come up directly in terms of the legislature. I mean, we don't do foreign policy. Some years ago, you mentioned resolutions. I did, many years ago, I did file once a Stand with Israel resolution. The people I'm thinking of now weren't in the legislature then. There was, no objection. I think, I've had a conversation with a colleague who has family who is Palestinian American, and that's been very respectful, mutually respectful and sharing conversation. And that individual is not one of the people you're thinking of. So while I'm aware that there's this whole conversation about anti-Israel and maybe even anti-Jewish sentiment on the far left, that hasn't been present in the legislature or my friends in the Democratic Party. I always get concerned about the politics of, and this isn't what you're suggesting, but the larger conversation that the Democratic Party is moving away from Israel. That's certainly not my perspective, or that of the people I know. It doesn't mean we don't have our share of criticisms, like everyone else. I have my share of criticisms for this country, but I think my colleagues in the legislature, for the most part, are pro-Israel.
I appreciate that very much, and it's. I want to lift up that nuance because I'm pretty sure I know which colleague you're referring to, because I have had conversations with a colleague of yours who has Palestinian family, and very respectful conversations, very interesting and engaging, and frankly, someone who I have incredible respect for that colleague's overall legislative agenda. And at the same time, it is frankly on my mind because my rep, I happen to live in Cambridge, my rep in Cambridge happens to be one of those very small number who, publicly when Cambridge took up a very anti-Israel resolution and frankly did it in the Cambridge City Council in a way that some of the Cambridge City councilors did in a very hostile to the Jewish community of Cambridge. One of your colleagues, who happens to be my personal rep where I live, was very supportive of this very hostile approach to dealing with this issue. But as you say, he's part of a very small number of the members who take that stance.
Right. And I would just say, as you were talking about it, I realized COVID had something to do with this, because if I was in person at that time in the House, I probably would have had a conversation with my colleague, because the tweets were disturbing to me. We were talking earlier before we got on, in fact, about the downside of many downsides to this pandemic, but one is you don't have those less formal conversations with people in the legislature.
That's a really good point. And definitely the lack of in-person relational conversations has diminished our ability to navigate some of this space. I want to switch gears because I know it's a recent and important accomplishment. We're coming sort of towards the end of the hour, which is ARPA, the federal funding that I guess just in the last week or so, the legislature reached an agreement on how to spend it. Really just kind of curious, because there's been sort of some highlights in the papers, but there hasn't been the sort of detailed sort of report out in the public square about sort of what's in there, what we expect to see on the ground. And really, I think people are just curious to know what's in this. Is it $4 billion of COVID-related funding? What were your priorities? What are you excited about in that bill? What are you excited to tell your constituents about that you got done there?
Okay, so one of the things you mentioned already, we got $12 million in the ARPA bill to help resettle Afghan refugees. So I was very proud to be one of the people that worked on that, and that was very enthusiastically supported by the legislature. I know JCRC was involved in advocating for that. The resettlement agencies came to us and said that they're going to need help, that a certain number of Afghan refugees will be coming to Massachusetts, and 12 million was the amount they told us they needed to make sure that those folks got the assistance. So, that was the amount. I can't resist mentioning again, connecting that to Safe Communities and Governor Baker, because Governor Baker, and speaking of social media, Governor Baker tweeted before we put that money in that Massachusetts stood ready to welcome Afghan refugees. And I retweeted and I said, thank you, Governor Baker, for welcoming Afghan refugees, and please sign the Safe Communities Act so that we can welcome all refugees and make them safe here in Massachusetts. But other things in the ARPA bill that were important, a lot of money went to help businesses with unemployment insurance because, we had a whole lot of unemployment during COVID. And that burden was felt by businesses, small businesses. What was important that the legislature did in addition to that was we put an equal amount of money into giving relief to low-income frontline workers who worked during COVID. And they're getting relief out of that as well. There's a long list of money going to healthcare and to mental health. When you ask what did I work on, one of the things I should mention is I am a big advocate for civil legal aid services so that low-income people get the assistance in the courts that they need. And one of the amendments that I got some money for was some money to continue to help MLAC, who's done a lot of work representing people who've been evicted during this crisis.
Can you say what MLAC is?
Mass Legal Assistance Corporation. They are the umbrella that gives grants out to legal aid services. I should have said right. In-house speaking. And then my own individual. So maybe people find interesting. So one of the things the media will do is they'll say, oh, there's all kinds of pork, or there's, earmarks, And the thing, and the legislature,
Jews can call it pork too.
Yeah, we could call it pork too. And I sort of want to give a shout out for pork and for earmarks, because which the legislature, the speaker, and the chairman of Ways and Means will often try to get that message out that what one person calls, pork or earmarks is really about people who are close to the community knowing what the needs are. And so one of the things I got money for was there is a graduate school of psychology that's in Newton called the William James College, and they've observed, because they train psychologists, that there's this huge shortage of a behavioral health workforce, and they want to launch a center for training behavioral health workers. So I got them a grant to kick that off. I got a grant to UMass Amherst, which is now at Mount Ida College in Newton, right down the block from me. They want to launch they inherited a veterinary school from Mount Ida, and they want to launch a clinic for low-income pet owners. Something I wasn't tuned into because I'm not a pet person, but during COVID, one of the things that happened was low-income people couldn't afford to take care of their pets. So there's going to be a clinic for low-income pet owners because of that amendment. So those are the kinds of things from big to small, from, unemployment insurance and help for frontline workers to, starting a new clinic for low-income pet owners in my district.
Well, I'm going to say, first of all, once again, as we said before, yay on the refugee funding, because, as we touched on when we were talking about Safe Communities, we have been doing work at JCRC supporting a network that's welcoming literally hundreds of Afghan refugees into the Commonwealth. So it's, really important to have that support from the state, and we were proud to be part of that work and very grateful for you and your colleagues on that. And on a more, this is not official JCRC position because we don't take organizational positions on a lot of process issues, but I'm all in favor of line items or member items, and there's a fair amount of actually political science analysis that Congress worked better. I know that's not, you're at the State House, but that Congress worked better and got more done before they eliminated all of that from their budgeting process, and that a lot of their problems in the recent decades in terms of getting things done is that members don't have personal things to go home and tell their district, this is why I supported the overall budget, or here's what I'm doing for you in the work. So yay. Which is not, and I certainly don't have a comment about, pet clinics, but I'm all, it's always good when the pets are getting good treatment in my house. I know that. I have friends who, it's all good. We're coming to the end of the hour. Any final thoughts, things that you want to share that you're working on or that we haven't touched on that you just want to just like lift up at this time?
Well, I always love to mention one of my favorite bills that I've had some success. I think I referred to it earlier, but the Public Lands Preservation Act is a bill that I have, it's an issue that I've literally worked on for 20 years. It has to do with protecting our public parks. One of the things I always like to mention, because most people don't really know about it, but one of the really beautiful things about our Massachusetts state constitution is we have an amendment called Article 97, which gives to the people of Massachusetts the right to clean air, clean water, and protected open space. My legislation would strengthen Article 97 in a variety of ways that I don't have to detail, but it's about protecting our public parks. And COVID, if anything we learned from COVID, was how important our public parks are. Because I know that's where most people spent a whole lot of time. And it's really important, especially in our more densely populated communities. So I'm very pleased that after many years, the House has passed the Public Lands Preservation Act. It's over in the Senate. I hope the Senate passes it as well. It would be a real accomplishment, because those are the kinds of things I work on. I work on civil rights we talked about. I work on addiction and mental health. And I also work on issues about the environment and climate. So by having added PLPA to this conversation, I think I've covered the full spectrum of the work I do.
Well, we've definitely covered a broad spectrum of issues, and I want to congratulate you for passing that in the House. And I look forward to hopefully very, very soon being able to congratulate you on passing the Safe Communities Act. And as always, you've been incredibly generous with your time, as you've always been to JCRC in particular and to the Jewish community. You're just an amazing partner and friend. And we are, as a community, and just very fortunate to have you representing your district and being a Jewish leader in the State House. So thank you very much. And before I wrap up, any final words from you?
Well, just right back at you, as they say. Thank you for your support, your partnership, and all that the JCRC does in the community. We haven't, all that you do, not only for immigrants, but for seniors and people with disabilities, and just all the folks that need help. So, I'm proud to be considered one of your allies and partners. Thank you.
We're proud to consider you one of our community's leaders. So thank you again to Representative Balzer, for sharing your critical work with us. To learn more about JCRC's legislative priorities, you can go to our website. We'll include a link in the chat under our programs, our advocacy priorities. Our next speaker series program will be next week with Dr. Rachel Fish. We'll be having a conversation about why we can't stop talking about anti-Semitism, among other things. So please register by clicking the link in the chat, and we'll also include the registration details in a follow-up email. And then finally, I'm very excited that on December 21st, we're going to be starting a new sort of mini-series within our lunchtime speaker programs, which is being called The Story of Our Community. I'm going to be sitting down with colleagues who are the regional and local professional leaders of many of our member organizations that make up the JCRC, to talk about the breadth of our community, to learn about the diversity of our members, and to lift up the valuable work being done across this network that is the organized Jewish community of Greater Boston. For more information and registration, please again go to our website, jcrcboston.org. And again, we'll include a link in the chat and in the follow-up email. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a good day.